Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Doors. Today I'm here with Michelle Castle, and we're going to talk about the 5 pitfalls that you want to avoid when you're doing a fix and flip. So be sure and stay tuned. So Michelle, when people are doing a fix and flip, what are some of the common pitfalls and some of the common mistakes that they typically make that can ultimately hurt their bottom line?
Fast, easy money
Yeah.
isn't always a good idea.
Okay.
So there, you hear people call and you'll hear the conversation, hey, I need a hard money lender.
Right.
But do you really? And maybe the audience even needs to know, what is a hard money lender?
Right. Yeah, and for the people that don't know, that's something where it's you pay a higher interest rate. Whenever you get those hard money loans, typically it is very similar to making a cash offer. Mm-hmm. Some of those hard money lenders still make it contingent on their appraisal. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some buyers not write in the appraisal contingency, and then their earnest money's at risk while the hard money lender's doing his due diligence on the property and the project. But for the most part, it's treated like a cash offer, but it's typically a higher interest rate. There's typically points that are charged, and it's a shorter loan period. So you want to make sure you have a good understanding of like what your project timeline looks like. If you get a 6-month loan and it's going to take you 4 or 5 months to complete the project, and you've only got 30 days to...
And those are the panic calls I get. It's like, we're out of time, but we're not done with the house.
Yeah, and the guy wants his money back, or he's going to
there's big fees.
Yeah, there's fees attached to it, all kinds of stuff. So that's where people who are inexperienced with hard money can really get themselves in a bind whenever it comes to using hard money.
It's always so interesting too, because like whenever I'm having a conversation with someone and they're wanting a rescue because they're in a bad spot, is they really didn't need a hard money loan. Yeah. They could have gotten a traditional loan that would have given them the time, saved them some money, but it wouldn't have been that cash offer. Right. They would have really, but it's really still not cash offer because it's contingent upon someone else's money to be there. So, but yes, that is something to avoid for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the next things that I have seen happen is hiring bad contractors. And this is something that you hear time and again. It's like, well, the contractor took our money and they were supposed to go buy materials. They just took off, or we paid them all up front. And so that's where you can really run into some issues. What are some good tips on avoiding that, making sure that you're getting somebody who's trustworthy, who's actually going to do what they say they're going to do, and managing your pay schedule with them? What are some tips that you've heard?
I think it's really important that you have, you've got to check references. Yeah. And for me too, it's not just the reference of people that they've worked with, it's the suppliers they buy the supplies from that really matters. Right. Because if you're dealing with, let's just say, a framer, and that framer is buying all of the materials are dropped on the site, if that framer does not pay for those materials, then that company could even come after you as the owner and file a lien on your property for the materials on your property. Yeah. So not just calling calling references for people they've done work for, but are they paying the bills to the suppliers for the supplies that they're using?
That's something I didn't even think about. That is a great point though. And whenever it comes to like getting those references, or even like for me personally, whenever, and this isn't always the case, but whenever I get estimates from different contractors or subcontractors, I'm always a little concerned about the ones that come in so far under everybody else. And I'm like, okay, are they going to tell me this low price up front and then jack it up on the back end? Or are they telling me this low price and going to just take off with whatever money I give them on the front end for materials? So it's always something to think about. And if you have, if you get 3 or 4 estimates from 3 or 4 different contractors for a project, and
ask questions.
Yeah, ask questions, especially if you've got one that's not really in line with the others.
Well, and the other thing, I've run into this in my experience is it might be less because they're going to do all the work themselves.
Right, and they're not subbing it out.
They're not subbing it out, or they're not hiring a crew to help them. If, let's just say I've had someone build a deck on the back of my property and it was a solo person. The problem with that is what happens if something happens to that person and you're in the middle of a project now because you're counting on one person. I mean, we really had to get someone else in to finish the work. Well, it cost us more money than it would have if we had gone with the other bid. So I mean, vetting out your contractors is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think a huge thing that you can do is if you're going to be, getting those references, is make sure that it's somebody, like, I can't stress enough making sure that you actually talk to people that have used them, ask them, did they come in on time? Did they come in on budget? If they didn't, was that something that was, how was the communication in that process? What was the reason it went over budget? Was it because of materials, or was it because they just wanted more money? So there's all kinds of things that you want to ask whenever it comes to contractors. And I feel like we could just make a whole episode on.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking like workman's comp, you know, are they carrying workman's comp if they're doing something that would, could possibly be a liability for you? So that's another whole episode.
Yeah, but just make sure you're working with a great contractor. Okay, so one of the things that, I guess the next thing that I hear quite often would be,
one thing that you and I didn't talk about before that I think is important too, if you're buying for a fix and flip, is sometimes you're trying to avoid changing the footprint of the house. But when you're fixing and flipping, then you really do need to pay attention to bedrooms, laundry room, kitchen, bathrooms, because like you look at some houses and it's like, they've got the laundry room in a really weird spot. Is it possible to, some of those things matter. Yeah. And so we did talk about budget and planning because I think that people do underestimate the cost of things. Yeah. But I think it's really important to know the market, know what the market is looking for before you start that budgeting and planning. Yeah. Which, I mean, you need to talk to an expert who sells houses and what are buyers looking for, because even those trends change. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've fixed a house to sell, and I wouldn't do that without having a conversation with you and saying, okay, what are buyers looking for now? Yeah.
And that's a great point. So, on the whole budgeting and planning is number one, with your contractors, like get realistic estimates of what it's going to cost. Going over budget is one of the biggest things that's going to ruin your deal. And it's where you try and get, if we spend a little bit more money on this certain type of material, but you do that all throughout the house, and that's not what you originally talked about with your contractor, or maybe you just kind of guessed what it was going to cost and you didn't know. Yeah. That's where you can really mess up a deal. And then once again, you've got that hard money loan, and it's like we went over budget. I've got my own money in it, and you can just run into all kinds of issues. But I love the point you brought up about make sure it's what consumers are looking for. I see so many people that are like, they find a 3,000 square foot house and they're like, it's a ton of square footage. It's going to be a great fix and flip. I'm going to make a ton of profit. Yeah. I'm looking at the dollar per square foot. And then you start really breaking it down, and it's like, well, 500 square feet over here was an add-on. 750 square foot here is where they closed in the garage. And then you start kind of backing some of that out, and it's like, it's just a weird house. It's a weird layout. Look for something that's traditional. I don't want, not traditional necessarily, but something that's conforms to the neighborhood. Right. That has the same features of what other homes in the neighborhood have. Make sure you pick it in a good location, because that is part of planning and budgeting. If you're getting a great deal or getting a property at a really low price in a really bad area, and you can't sell it, there's a reason it was so low. So make sure that you're looking at that consult with a real estate agent about all that stuff. And yeah, really the planning and just understanding what consumers are looking for can also make or break your deal. Yeah.
Which brings up another point, misunderstanding the value of the house as improved.
Yes.
So many people do go, okay, well, it's X number of square feet and I'm buying it for this. And if I put this much in it, houses in the neighborhood are selling for X number of square feet. And that's not how you price a house.
Right. Right.
So I see that a lot where there's just this unrealistic expectation on what the house is going to bring.
Yeah. And that's one thing that on the real estate side, on the listing agent side, that I deal with quite a bit is where somebody maybe bought a property not using an agent, or maybe they bought it from another real estate agent who didn't represent them or whatever, or they said, yeah, you could probably fix it and flip it and sell it for, and they just made up a number without actually really looking at it. And I have property owners come to me that are trying to sell it, and they're like, well, I've got, I bought this, I paid this much for it, I've got this much in it, you need to sell it for this. And I'm like, I'm sure I do need to sell it for that, but that's not how this works. Like, here's what it can sell for. Yeah. So kind of like you have to help people out in that, like they're coming to you and they're like, hey, I'm in a tight spot with my finances and this hard money lender, and I need out of it. I have people come to me that are kind of in that same hard spot of like, well, and maybe they've already talked to a realtor that's told them the truth, and they're asking for my second opinion, and I'm like, yeah, no, they were right. They were right. You can't sell it for what you think you could. Which brings us to, I think this would be our fifth point, right?
Yeah, the holding.
Well, just the cost associated with the sale, which can be your holding cost and your closing cost. So we'll kind of break those two out, but holding costs would be like servicing the debt that you have on it. So if you have a hard money loan or a line of credit and you have to make those interest payments back to your creditor, or even if you have a rehab loan from somebody like Guild Mortgage, you've got to make those monthly payments. And then you also have utilities, you have taxes and insurance, just lawn
the maintenance,
care, so you don't get fined by the city. Just maintaining the property while you own it. That's stuff that you have to put all that stuff into your spreadsheet and calculate it.
Budget.
And that's something that could take you from having a decent deal to just barely make, breaking even, or to hopefully breaking even. And then let's talk about closing costs, because a lot of people are like, I sell the property for this, I take out what I spent to fix it up and what I paid for it, and that's my profit. But there's a lot of closing costs that can be associated with the sale too. There could be real estate commissions, title fees, escrow fees,
appraisal, attorneys, survey.
Survey, all that stuff adds up, and I think people forget to include that. And so, if you take one of those five things that we talked about and forget to factor in your deal for that,
it's a couple $1,000s.
Yeah, could be a couple $1,000s to several $1,000s, and that eats into your profit. If you take all five of those and back that out, you're going to be losing money on your deal. So it's important.
Well, and
to keep
I think the backside of that too is when I'm looking at those deals, I'm already calculating my capital gains too. Because you can pretty much estimate. I always just roughly estimate 25% for capital gains. You got to factor that too when you're talking about profit.
Because it is an expense whenever you go to sell something. It is an expense.
You're not writing that check at the time of closing, but you're still writing a check. So it's challenging, it's interesting, it's fun, especially if you're creative. It does allow you to, your money's making money, but you got to be smart about it.
One thing, I was talking to my CPA about some of her clients that she's seen do fix and flips, and she said, they could, for as much time as they spent in the property and for what they made, they could have gone and got a part-time job at Home Depot with no risk, and they could have made the same money. Go work on the weekends at Home Depot.
Because you are going to invest your time.
And that's the thing. That's
another line item budget. Really, you ought to figure in there is how much time is my time worth, and how much time am I going to spend on this project. So it's like if you net $10,000 or $15,000 over a 6-month period. Was it worth your time? And for some people, it is worth your time. Especially if you enjoy it.
If you enjoy it, and you're really looking at, okay, I net $15,000 that I wouldn't have had, regardless of if I was working a part-time job somewhere or doing this, then yes, it is worth it. But it's all the things that you need to factor whenever you're looking at
And I think it's
project.
important that we have investors willing to do that, because there's a lot of home buyers that they don't have the money and they don't have the financial means to make the improvements that need to be made. And they need to be able, they've got young families, they're busy, they just need to be able to move into a move-in ready house.
Right.
So, I mean, we need those investors out there buying those houses and getting them ready to put back on the market.
Yeah.
But you just have to do it well and do it right. Yeah.
Well, that was a fun conversation. I really enjoyed talking about all things fix and flip and what to avoid. If you have questions about the financing side, reach out to Michelle. If you have questions about what properties you should be looking at and how to evaluate those and what they could sell for, be sure and reach out to me. I'd love to help you with that. And we will see you on the next episode.
Yo!